A hurricane that will never make landfall anywhere in California is about to become one of the most dangerous ocean events the state sees all year. Hurricane Genevieve just exploded into a Category 5 storm hundreds of miles off Mexico, and it's sending a wall of swell straight toward Southern California's beaches, arriving at the exact moment thousands of people are already in the water for one of the biggest surf competitions on the planet. Genevieve was a tropical storm as recently as Saturday afternoon, before any of this began. Within about 24 hours, it rapidly intensified into a full Category 5 hurricane, with sustained winds reaching nearly 160 miles per hour early Monday morning, July 27, 2026, catching even seasoned forecasters somewhat off guard. That makes it the first Category 5 hurricane in the eastern Pacific Basin in 2 years, since Hurricane Christy in 2024, and the strongest storm the Western Hemisphere has produced so far this year. By Monday afternoon, Genevieve had eased slightly to a high-end Category 4 with winds around 155 miles per hour, and the National Hurricane Center expects its intensity to keep fluctuating over the next couple of days before it finally begins to weaken. Here's the part that actually matters for California specifically. Genevieve is not forecast to make landfall anywhere. It's spinning roughly 500 miles southwest of the Baja California Peninsula, tracking northwest on a path that runs roughly parallel to the Mexican coastline, and steering currents are expected to keep it well clear of any land for the next several days, curving even farther out to sea over time. That's genuinely good news if you're worried about wind damage or a direct hit. It's also exactly why this storm is dangerous in a completely different way. A hurricane this powerful, even sitting hundreds of miles offshore, generates enormous long-period ocean swells that radiate outward across thousands of miles of open water. And Genevieve's swell is aimed directly at the Southern Calif. The National Hurricane Center has already issued an urgent marine safety bulletin as these swells move northward, warning that they're likely to cause life-threatening surf and dangerous rip current conditions along the coast. Rip currents are exactly what they sound like, powerful channels of water flowing rapidly away from shore, capable of pulling even strong, confident swimmers out to sea in a matter of seconds, and they're responsible for the overwhelming majority of ocean rescues and drownings recorded along the California coast every single year. A storm generating swell. This large means beach conditions can look deceptively calm and genuinely inviting on the surface, while carrying currents strong enough to overpower an experienced adult swimmer just a short distance from shore. Understanding why rip currents form helps explain why they're so consistently underestimated. As larger than normal waves break along a beach, they push a significant volume of water up onto the shore. That water has to find its way back out to sea somehow, and it tends to do so by funneling through the lowest, most efficient channel it can find. Often a gap between sandbars, a channel near a pier or jetty, or a break in an otherwise even stretch of shoreline. Once that outflow channel forms, it can move an enormous amount of water seaward in a narrow, fast-moving current, sometimes reaching several feet per second, far faster than almost anyone can swim against directly. The surface of a rip current often looks calmer than the surrounding water, sometimes even flatter or more inviting, precisely because the energy is moving water out rather than breaking waves on top of it, which is exactly why so many swimmers wander into one without realizing anything is wrong until they're already being pulled away from shore. If real, current hazard reporting, the kind that could genuinely matter to you or someone you know this week, is exactly what you come here for, go ahead and subscribe, because we track stories like this as they develop. What's actually fueling a storm this powerful comes down to genuinely warm ocean water, not anything more exotic. The eastern Pacific is currently running through a significant El Niño pattern, a naturally occurring climate cycle where sea surface temperatures across large stretches of the tropical Pacific run well above normal. Meteorologists tracking Genevieve's rapid intensification pointed to light to moderate wind shear, a moist atmosphere with humidity above 80%, and sea surface temperatures around 30 degrees Celsius, roughly 86 degrees Fahrenheit, as the specific ingredients that let the storm explode from a tropical storm to a Category 5. Hurricane in about a day. Warm water is jet fuel for a hurricane. The warmer and deeper that warm layer runs, the more energy a storm has available to draw on as it spins. And this year's El Niño has left an unusually deep reservoir of warm water sitting right in Genevieve's path. It helps to understand exactly why wind shear and humidity matter as much as raw water temperature, since a hurricane needs more than just warm water to actually organize into something this powerful. Wind shear refers to winds blowing at different speeds or directions at different altitudes above a storm, and strong shear tends to tear a developing hurricane apart before it can build a stable, symmetrical structure, essentially decapitating the storm's upper structure away from its base. When shear is light, as it was for Genevieve, a storm is free to build straight upward into a tall, well-organized column, pulling in moisture and heat far more efficiently. Combine that structural freedom with an atmosphere already saturated with moisture, and a storm sitting over unusually warm water has almost nothing standing in the way of rapid intensification. Exactly the sequence that turned Genevieve from a tropical storm into a Category 5 hurricane in roughly a single day. Genevieve isn't traveling alone either. It's the third named storm in a recent stretch to spin up in the eastern Pacific, following Tropical Storm Elida and Hurricane Fausto, both riding the same unusually warm El Niño-charged waters. Fausto, meanwhile, has been separately bringing large surf and dangerous currents to Hawaii's east-facing shores as it passes north of the islands. Having multiple significant storms forming back-to-back in the same basin within the same stretch of days is itself a signal of just how favorable current ocean conditions are for rapid storm development this year. The timing of Genevieve's swell arrival is what turns this from a routine ocean hazard update into something genuinely worth paying close attention to. Southern California is currently hosting the U.S. Open of Surfing, one of the largest and most closely watched surfing competitions in the world, drawing huge crowds of both competitors and spectators directly to the beach. Surf forecasters have been comparing Genevieve's incoming swell to Hurricane Marie back in 2014, still remembered as something close to the gold standard for a powerful, well-timed summer swell hitting Southern California. Surfline, one of the industry's most closely followed forecasting services, noted that Marie was a similarly powerful storm that took a similar track, but was roughly twice the physical size of Genevieve, a difference that matters. Because a larger storm generates swell across a wider stretch of ocean, translating into an even more sustained period of big surf on shore. Genevieve's swell won't necessarily match Marie's in scale, but it's arriving with more than enough power to create serious hazards up and down the coast, right as an unusually large number of people are already in and around the water because of the... That comparison to 2014 is worth sitting with for a moment, because it tells you something about how these events tend to unfold once a swell like this actually arrives. Hurricane Marie's swell that year produced some of the most dramatic, widely photographed surf Southern California has seen in recent memory. But it also triggered a wave of ocean rescues and closed beaches up and down the coast as rip currents and unusually powerful shore break caught inexperienced swimmers off guard. A swell exciting enough to draw surfers and photographers to the water in large numbers is, almost by definition, also energetic enough to make the ocean considerably more dangerous than usual for anyone not specifically trained and equipped to handle it. It's worth understanding exactly why a storm spinning hundreds of miles away can still put swimmers in real danger back on shore, because the mechanism isn't obvious if you've never thought about how ocean swell actually works. A hurricane's spinning winds transfer enormous amounts of energy into the surrounding ocean surface, generating waves that then travel outward from the storm's center in every direction, well beyond the actual storm system itself. Long-period swell, the kind of powerful, well-organized hurricane like Genevieve produces, can travel enormous distances across open ocean while losing remarkably little energy along the way, arriving at a distant coastline as powerful, well-organized wave sets even though the storm that generated them may already be thousands of miles away or long since weakened. That's exactly why Southern California can experience genuinely hazardous surf conditions from a hurricane that never comes anywhere close to making landfall there. The National Hurricane Center's warning specifically flagged this exact chain of events, that swells generated by Genevieve are already affecting portions of the southwestern coast of Mexico and the Baja California Peninsula, producing life-threatening surf and rip current conditions there first, before that same swell energy continues propagating northward up the coast toward California over the following days. Coastal officials and lifeguard agencies across Southern California typically respond to warnings like this by increasing staffing, posting additional warning flags, and urging beachgoers to stay closer to shore and away from jetties, piers, and other structures where rip currents tend to concentrate most dangerously. There's also a secondary hazard worth understanding alongside the rip current danger, and that's the possibility of coastal flooding tied to the same swell event. When large, powerful waves arrive in rapid succession along a coastline, they can push unusually large volumes of water higher up the beach and in low-lying coastal areas, occasionally over seawalls and onto roads and property, particularly if the swell happens to coincide with normal high tide cycles. Forecasters tracking Genevieve have flagged possible coastal flooding alongside the big wave conditions as something Southern California communities should be prepared for over the next several days. Not just a surfing hazard, but a genuine coastal infrastructure concern in the more vulnerable, low-elevation beach communities. This kind of overlap, a large swell arriving on top of an already elevated tide, is exactly the combination coastal emergency planners watch most closely, because either factor on its own is usually manageable, while the two stacked together can meaningfully raise water levels beyond what a stretch of coastline is built to handle. Piers, jetties, and other structures extending out into the surf zone tend to see the most concentrated wave energy and are typically among the first areas local officials restrict access to when a swell event like this arrives, both because of the flooding risk and because these structures tend to intensify the rip currents forming immediately around them. None of this means Southern California is facing anything close to hurricane conditions itself. Wind, rain, and storm surge, the hazards most people associate with an actual hurricane strike, simply aren't part of this picture because Genevieve's entire circulation is staying hundreds of miles out to sea. What California is actually facing is something more specific, and, in some ways, more insidious precisely because it's easy to underestimate. A beach can look completely normal, sunny, calm-looking waves rolling in with no obvious sign of the underlying danger, while a rip current strong enough to overpower a fit adult swimmer runs just beneath the surface a few dozen feet from shore. That gap between how a hazardous beach day looks and how dangerous it actually is happens to be exactly why swell-driven rip current events, rather than the storms that generate them, are responsible for such a large share of California's ocean rescues and drownings every year. Genevieve itself isn't expected to last much longer as a major hurricane. Meteorologists tracking its path note that it's heading into a fairly typical pattern for powerful eastern Pacific storms moving northwest, one where the ocean's hurricane-supportive warmth simply doesn't extend as far into the subtropics as it often does in the western Atlantic. Sea surface temperatures along Genevieve's forecast path are expected to drop below 25 degrees Celsius by Thursday. And once a storm this powerful moves over meaningfully cooler water, its structure typically begins to break down fairly quickly. By the coming weekend, forecasters expect Genevieve to have weakened substantially or dissipated entirely. The swell it's already generated, though, doesn't disappear on the same schedule. Ocean swell continues traveling and arriving at distant coastlines for days after the storm that created it has already faded, which is exactly why the hazardous surf and rip current window for California extends well beyond however long Genevieve itself remains a powerful hurricane out at sea, and why lifeguard agencies typically keep elevated warnings in place even after headlines about the storm itself have moved on. So here's the actual practical bottom line if you're anywhere near the Southern California coast this week. This isn't a storm that's coming for you directly, and there's no wind or rain event to prepare for on land, but the ocean itself is genuinely more dangerous than it looks right now, and it's going to stay that way for several days, while this swell works its way through. If you're planning to be at the beach, especially anywhere near the U.S. Open of surfing crowds, pay attention to posted flags and lifeguard warnings. Stay closer to shore than you normally would, and take rip current warnings seriously, even if the water looks calm from where you're standing. Every year, it's exactly this kind of hazard, the one that doesn't come with obvious wind and rain to announce itself, that catches people off guard. It's genuinely worth remembering that the most dangerous ocean days in California rarely look like disaster movie weather. They look like exactly this: clear skies, warm temperatures, a good-looking swell rolling in, and huge crowds drawn to the water precisely because conditions look this inviting. That gap between appearance and actual danger is the entire story here, and it's why a hurricane sitting 500 miles away, one that will never make landfall anywhere near the state, can still end up being one of the more genuinely hazardous ocean events California sees all summer. If breaking down real current hazards like this clearly enough to actually help you make a safer call this week is what you come here for, make sure you're subscribed. And if you're anywhere near the Southern California coast right now, let me know in the comments what conditions look like where you actually are, and I'll see you in the next one.